The fire crackled low under the vast sky, its glow painting shadows on the warrior's face as he spoke words she had never expected. His voice was firm, steady like the beating of a drum, and his eyes carried a weight far deeper than the desire she feared. "I will not use you. I will honor you," he said, the syllables falling like sacred vows into the silence of the night. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause, but her heart, hardened by betrayal and loss, could not accept them. With bitterness sharp as the desert wind, she answered that it was only desire. The Old West was a land where trust was rare and promises often shattered before the dawn. She had seen men disguise hunger as affection, power as devotion, leaving only wounds where tenderness should have been. To her, his words felt like another mask, another way to bind her spirit and take what she guarded most fiercely, her dignity. And yet, there was something in his gaze that unsettled her certainty. It was not hunger, not possession, but a quiet defiance against everything she thought she knew about men and their intentions. Around them, the night stretched endlessly, filled with the cries of coyotes and the whisper of the wind through dry grass. He sat still, not reaching for her, not forcing his will, but waiting. That patience itself was strange to her, almost frightening in its unfamiliarity. Men of the frontier rarely waited. They took. Yet here he was, offering not the chains of desire, but the unfamiliar promise of respect. And in the hollow places of her heart, she felt a flicker of doubt. Not in him, but in the wall she had built to protect herself. Her body trembled with the weight of memory, with scars left by voices that had once promised love and delivered only pain. She wanted to dismiss him, to hold tightly to her anger and disbelief, because it was easier to live behind the shield of suspicion than to risk believing. But his words echoed again, low and unshaken. "I will honor you." And in that echo, she heard something no man had ever offered her before: choice. So the night began not as a tale of passion, but as a battle between mistrust and sincerity, between wounds of the past and the fragile possibility of something true. Beneath the starlit sky, their story unfolded at the edge of silence, where a woman wrestled with disbelief and an Apache warrior dared to prove that respect could exist even in a world carved by cruelty. And from that fragile beginning, a truth greater than desire began to take shape. The night after his words lingered in her mind like embers refusing to die. She sat apart from the fire, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, trying to shake away the memory of every broken promise that had scarred her. Men had spoken sweetly before, had sworn loyalty only to vanish with the dawn or to turn their vows into chains. She had learned that words were often weapons, used to disarm the heart before striking it down. That was why she had called him a liar. It was easier than letting hope touch her again. But the Apache warrior did not press her, nor did he try to defend his honor with more words. Instead, he rose quietly, gathering wood for the fire, his every movement steady and deliberate. His silence unsettled her more than any argument could have. She expected anger, insistence, or the hunger of a man wounded by rejection. Instead, she saw patience, the patience of someone who had nothing to prove, only something to live. And that was harder to dismiss. The flames flickered across his face, illuminating lines carved not by vanity, but by hardship. His eyes carried a weight that only the West could give, the weight of battles fought, of losses endured, of truths buried in the soil alongside those who had fallen. He did not look at her as a possession, nor as a conquest. His gaze was level, calm, as if he saw in her something worth protecting, not consuming. She tried to harden herself, to keep her suspicion intact, but the silence between them grew heavy with unspoken meaning. Every glance, every gesture, seemed to challenge her belief that men were only driven by desire. If that was all he wanted, he would have taken it, as others had. Yet here he was, offering something else entirely, something she had never been given: choice and the dignity of being seen as more than her body. Still, her heart battled within her. Was his restraint another tactic, another mask waiting to fall? Or was it the rare truth she had spent years believing did not exist? She told herself it was easier to cling to disbelief. But as the night stretched on, she felt the faint stirrings of a dangerous thought. What if he meant every word? The next day dawned with a sharp chill, the kind that crept into the bones and refused to leave. She woke early, expecting him to already be gone, but found him near the stream, kneeling as he washed his face in the cold water. The sun had barely touched the horizon, yet he was already preparing for the day's labor. She stood at a distance, watching quietly, torn between leaving and staying. There was no chain binding her there, no command holding her back. She realized with a jolt that she was free, and yet she had not walked away. He noticed her presence, but did not call to her. Instead, he went about his tasks with the same calm rhythm as always, gathering wood, tending the horses, checking the traps he had set the night before. There was no performance, no attempt to impress her. His strength spoke for itself, not through boasts, but through the way he endured without complaint. And for the first time, she began to see that honor was not in words, but in the way a man lived when no one applauded. By midday, they worked side by side without meaning to. She helped tie bundles of wood, her hands fumbling at first, and used the rough twine, while he worked with quiet efficiency. He never mocked her mistakes, never snatched the task from her hands. Instead, he showed her how, guiding her fingers with the patience of someone who understood that strength came in many forms. It startled her, this kindness that asked for nothing in return. When they paused to rest, she finally spoke, her voice hesitant. "Why do you waste your time on me?" she asked. He turned his head, the faintest trace of a smile flickering across his lips. "Time is never wasted when it is spent honoring truth," he replied. The simplicity of the answer left her speechless. There was no charm, no flattery, only conviction. And conviction, she realized, was far harder to argue against than desire. As the sun sank low once again, she found herself studying him differently. The doubt had not vanished, but it no longer burned as fiercely. His actions throughout the day had spoken louder than the firelit words of the night before. She still carried her scars, her mistrust, her fear. But now, for the first time in years, a new thought unsettled her. Perhaps not every man came to take. Perhaps some came to give. As the days unfolded, the distance between them began to shrink in ways neither could deny. She had expected his patience to fade, his words to unravel, but instead, they grew heavier with proof. He carried himself with the same steadiness each morning, his labor consistent, his silence unbroken except for the few words that mattered. She noticed how he treated even the smallest of tasks with dignity, fixing a broken strap on his horse, repairing a crack in the water pail, as though everything in his care deserved respect. It made her wonder if that same respect truly extended to her. One evening, as dusk bled across the horizon, she wandered toward the edge of camp and found herself staring at the prairie. Its vastness had always frightened her, an endless reminder of how small and fragile she was in a world that devoured the weak. But this time, she felt his presence behind her, not as a shadow looming over her, but as a steady force at her side. He said nothing, only stood there, sharing the silence. For the first time, the prairie did not feel so endless. Still, the weight of her past bore down heavily. She remembered nights when other men had promised safety only to abandon her at the first sign of hardship. The scars of betrayal were not easily erased, and her instinct was to keep her heart locked behind iron walls. "You will grow tired of me," she muttered under her breath, almost too softly to be heard. But he turned his gaze toward her, calm and unwavering. "I do not honor you for as long as it is easy," he replied. "I honor you because it is right." Those words cut deep, not because they were loud or dramatic, but because they carried the weight of a conviction she had never known. His truth did not demand trust immediately, but it invited it slowly, patiently, like a seed pressed into the soil. She felt torn between disbelief and longing, afraid of being deceived, yet desperate to believe that perhaps, just once, a man's words might not turn to ash. That night, as the stars scattered across the sky, she lay awake, her heart restless. Every instinct told her to guard herself, to laugh at his honor and dismiss it as a game. But something about his silence, his consistency, and his quiet strength gnawed at her defenses. She had called his vow just desire, but each passing day made that accusation feel less certain. The true test came not in words, but in fire. One night, while the prairie slept under a silver moon, shouts tore through the darkness. A group of riders approached swiftly, torches blazing, rifles raised. Raiders! She froze, terror flooding her veins, as the past threatened to consume her again. She had seen this before, the chaos, the cruelty, the destruction left in their wake. Her body trembled, convinced that this would be the night everything ended. But the Apache warrior stood tall, his bow in hand, his voice low and steady. "Stay behind me if you wish, or stand with me if you dare. Either way, I will not let them dishonor you." His words, spoken in the heat of danger, carried no trace of desire, no shadow of manipulation. They were a promise of protection, not possession. In that moment, she realized that his honor was not bound to comfort. It was bound to sacrifice. The raiders charged, the night erupting in chaos. She clutched the knife he had once placed in her hands, her fear clawing at her throat. But when she saw him fight, his every movement precise, his every strike fueled by the weight of his vow, something inside her shifted. She was no longer just a frightened woman watching from the shadows. She was part of the stand, part of the defiance that refused to yield to cruelty. By the time the dust settled, the raiders had scattered, leaving only smoke and silence behind. Her body shook, not from weakness, but from the realization that she had not run. She had stood, knife in hand, ready to defend the life she barely believed could be hers. And beside her, he remained, bloodied but unbroken, his eyes still carrying the same calm certainty as when he first spoke. "I will honor you." That night, as they sat by the dying fire, she could no longer dismiss his vow as desire. He had risked his life, not to claim her, but to prove that she was worth more than the lies others had forced her to believe. And for the first time, she felt the walls around her heart begin to crack, not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. The following days were marked by an uneasy calm. The raiders had gone, but the memory of their fire lingered in the smoke-stained horizon. She worked beside him, gathering what had been broken, repairing what could be saved. Her hands, once soft and uncertain, bore the marks of labor now, calloused fingers, bruised palms. Each scar was a reminder that she had not hidden in fear. She had stood, and in standing, she had begun to claim a strength she never believed she had. He noticed, though he said little. The Apache warrior had never been one for grand speeches, but in the way he handed her tools, in the way he shared the weight of heavy work without hesitation, she felt his acknowledgement. His honor was not loud. It did not seek attention. It was woven into the small, steady gestures that built trust day by day. And slowly, she realized that she no longer looked at him with suspicion. She looked at him with something far more dangerous: hope. One afternoon, as the sun blazed overhead, she finally asked the question that had haunted her since their first night by the fire. "Why do you see me differently?" Her voice was brittle, as if she feared the answer more than silence. He paused, setting aside the rope in his hands, and met her gaze without flinching. "Because I know what it is to be unseen. I know what it is to have your worth measured by lies. And I will not let you carry that alone." Her chest tightened at his words, for they echoed with her own unspoken wounds. In a land where survival left little room for softness, he had chosen to see her not as fragile, but as someone worth fighting beside. His truth was not born from desire, but from understanding, from scars as deep as her own. And though her instinct told her to guard herself, something in his eyes invited her to lay down her shield, if only for a moment. That night, as they sat beneath the stars, she realized that her fear had begun to shift. It was no longer the fear of being used or abandoned. It was the fear of losing the fragile trust she had started to build, the fragile belief that perhaps, against all odds, a man's word could still mean something in the unforgiving West. The true measure of their bond came with hardship, as it always did on the frontier. A season of drought swept across the land, cracking the soil, withering crops, and leaving both animals and men parched. Survival became a daily battle, and the temptation to surrender to despair gnawed at everyone. Yet, through the endless thirst and hunger, He carried himself with the same quiet resilience, never faltering, never breaking. His strength was not in words, but in endurance, and she found herself drawing courage from it. She worked beside him in the scorching heat, her body aching, her spirit tested. More than once, she thought of giving up, of retreating into the shadows as she had done in the past. But when she looked at him, his back bent under the weight of the drought, his hands raw from toil, she knew she could not falter. Not because he demanded it, but because he believed she was capable of more. And she began to believe it too. One evening, when the well ran dry, she collapsed beside it, her throat burning with thirst, her heart heavy with despair. "This land will kill us," she whispered, her voice cracked and hollow. He knelt beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "The land takes," he said, "but it also gives. It only asks us to endure long enough to find its mercy." His words carried no guarantee, but they carried faith. And in the West, faith was stronger than certainty. She lifted her gaze to him, and in that moment, she understood the truth she had denied for so long. His vow to honor her was not a fleeting desire. It was the same vow he made to the land, to endure it, to respect it, to fight for it, even when it seemed merciless. His honor was not in what he said, but in how he lived, and she was now part of that life. By the time the first rain finally broke the drought, falling in heavy sheets that soaked the earth and their skin, she no longer doubted. As they stood together beneath the storm, laughter breaking from her lips for the first time in years, she realized that she had found something greater than survival. She had found a bond forged not in desire, but in honor, a truth the West itself could not erase. The rains had brought life back to the land, but with life came new trials. Word of the Apache warrior's strength, and the woman who stood beside him began to spread. Some called it respect, others whispered of weakness, that no man should place a woman at his side in the fires of battle. Yet he did not flinch at the whispers. His truth had never been measured by the voices of others. His honor was carved in silence, in deeds, in the bond they shared. She, too, began to feel the weight of the stairs when they passed through settlements. Women eyed her with envy or disbelief, men with suspicion or disdain. Once, she might have shrunk under their judgment, believing herself unworthy of anything but doubt. But now, when their eyes tried to reduce her to nothing more than beauty, she stood taller. For she knew that beside her walked a man who had looked past all of that and seen something truer. One night, as they camped by a riverbank, she asked him if the voices ever troubled him. His answer was simple: "Let them say what they will. I will not measure my life by their lies, only by what I choose to honor." His voice carried no anger, no pride, only clarity. And in that clarity, she felt the same strength that had carried him through storms and battles. He did not bend to the world. He stood against it, as steady as the mountains in the distance. Her heart swelled at his words, not because they were new, but because they echoed everything he had already proven. She thought of the raiders, of the drought, of the long nights when silence was their only companion. Through all of it, he had never broken faith with her. He had never turned his vow into chains. Each trial had only carved it deeper into truth. By the time the fire burned low, she realized that she no longer feared his vow. The doubt that had once clung to her like a shadow was gone. What remained was something stronger, something she had thought she would never feel again: trust. Trust not only in him, but in herself, in her own worth beyond the lies of her past. The West, however, was never finished with its trials. One fateful evening, they came upon a town torn apart by violence, buildings smoldering, families displaced, fear etched into every face. A group of men had taken control, preying upon the weak, demanding obedience through cruelty. The sight awakened old wounds within her, memories of being powerless, of being silenced by the force of others. But this time, she was no longer powerless. She carried both the scars of survival and the strength of his honor within her. The townsfolk whispered warnings, urging them to move on, to save themselves. But he refused. Honor does not walk past suffering, he told her as they stood at the edge of the broken town. She felt the tremor of fear in her chest, but she also felt the fire of his conviction. He was not driven by glory or revenge. He was driven by the same truth he had spoken to her beneath the stars. I will not use you. I will honor you. And now, that vow stretched beyond her. It extended to anyone stripped of dignity, anyone in need of protection. When the confrontation came, it was fierce and merciless. The men who had seized the town fought with desperation, their cruelty matched only by their cowardice. She stood with him, weapon in hand, her voice steady as she shouted warnings, her body no longer trembling with doubt. For the first time, she understood what it meant to live his vow, not just to receive honor, but to carry it forward, to embody it herself. Together, they pushed back the darkness. It was not easy, and it was not without cost. The scars of that battle would remain on the land and on their bodies, etched as reminders of what they had endured. But when the dust settled, and the townsfolk lifted their heads with hope flickering in their weary eyes, she understood that their story had grown beyond themselves. That night, as the town rebuilt piece by piece, she sat beside him by the fire. Her hand rested in his, not as a token of possession, but as a seal of the bond they had forged through fire, storm, and blood. She no longer doubted his vow, for she had seen it lived not once, but countless times. And now, she no longer dismissed it as desire. She knew, beyond all fear, that it was honor, a rare truth in a land carved by cruelty. In the weeks that followed, the town slowly regained its breath. Families rebuilt their homes, laughter began to echo faintly in the streets, and whispers of gratitude followed them wherever they walked. For her, the change was not just in the land around them, but in herself. Once, she had believed she was destined to remain unseen, used, or discarded. But now, she carried herself with a quiet pride, not born of vanity, but of knowing she had fought, endured, and chosen to stand. The Apache warrior saw the shift in her, though he spoke little of it. His gaze carried the same steadiness, but there was a softness now when he looked at her, a reflection of the trust she had finally allowed herself to give. He had vowed to honor her, and she had resisted him with all her might, convinced it was only desire disguised. Yet now, she realized that his vow had never been about conquering her heart. It had been about freeing it. One evening, as they walked the outskirts of the town, she finally confessed what had weighed on her since their first night by the fire. When you spoke those words, I hated them, not because they were false, but because I was too afraid they were true. He stopped, his hand gently brushing against hers, and in his silence, she felt no judgment, only understanding. In that quiet moment, she knew he had carried her doubts as patiently as he carried his scars. The prairie wind swept around them, carrying with it the scent of dust and distant rain. She looked out across the horizon and saw not emptiness, but possibility. For years, the land had seemed to her a cruel expanse, a reminder of everything she had lost. But with him, it had transformed into something else, a place where even broken souls could plant new roots. Her heart, once shielded by fear, now opened fully. She understood that his honor was not a mask, not a fleeting oath, but a way of living. It had been proven in every hardship they faced, in every silence they shared, and in every battle they survived together. And with that realization came a truth she could no longer deny. His vow had become their vow. The West remained as unforgiving as ever. Storms still split the skies, droughts still cracked the earth, and danger still lingered on the horizon. Yet for them, the trials no longer felt like chains. They were tests, harsh, merciless, but survivable as long as they stood together. What once had been a fight for mere survival had become a journey of endurance, built not on desire, but on honor and trust. Their story spread beyond the town, carried by travelers and whispered across campfires. Some told it as a tale of defiance, others as proof that even in a land of cruelty, truth could endure. And though the details shifted with each telling, one thing remained constant. The warrior's vow, spoken beneath the stars. I will not use you. I will honor you. The words had begun as a challenge, dismissed as nothing more than desire. But they had become the foundation of a legacy stronger than the land itself. She often thought back to the woman she had been before those words were spoken, fearful, mistrusting, convinced that her worth would always be reduced to the surface. That woman still lived within her, scarred but not forgotten. Yet now, she carried those scars as proof of survival, not as chains. The West had tried to strip her of dignity, but through his honor, she had found her own. For him, nothing had changed in how he lived. He still rose before dawn, still faced the day's labors without complaint. But everything had changed in why he lived. His vow had grown into something greater than a promise to one woman. It had become a way of walking through the world, to see worth where others did not, to defend dignity where it was denied, to honor not just her, but the very idea of truth itself. And so their tale was etched into the heart of the frontier, not as a story of conquest or beauty, but as a rare testament to the power of honor in a world carved by cruelty. In the end, desire fades, but truth endures. And in that enduring truth, the woman who once called him a liar found something more lasting than survival. She found a love that could not be broken. In the harsh silence of the frontier, where storms erased the weak and only the strongest truths endured, their story became more than survival. It was the tale of a woman who had been broken by deception, and a warrior who chose not to take but to honor. From that vow, dismissed at first as nothing more than desire, grew a bond stronger than drought, stronger than fire, stronger even than the cruelty of the West. Their lives became proof that what is tested by hardship and survives is what is most true. Her scars, once symbols of shame, became marks of resilience. His vow, once doubted, became a way of life. Together, they show that trust is not born in easy promises, but in the slow endurance of trials. The West gave them nothing freely. Not water, not peace, not safety. Yet within that merciless land, they carved out something greater. A truth that no whisper, no storm, no enemy could undo. Their story reminds us that dignity is never granted by others, but claimed by those who dare to believe they are worth more. The lesson is not bound to the dust and blood of the Old West. It is timeless. In our own lives, we too are tested by betrayal, by doubt, by the voices that tell us we are less than we are. But the story of the warrior and the woman teaches us that when someone chooses to see you for who you truly are, not for what you appear to be, it can change everything. And, just as important, when you choose to believe in that truth, you reclaim your own power. So let this story linger, not as a tale of distant lands, but as a mirror. Ask yourself, how often do we mistake honor for desire, truth for lies, worth for appearances? And how often do we let fear keep us from believing in what could set us free? The answer is not simple, but the choice is always ours, to close ourselves off or to dare, as she did, to believe again. If this story moved you, let your voice be part of it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell what it stirred within you, and let others know they are not alone in their struggles. Support this journey by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, so more tales like this can remind us of the strength hidden in scars, the power of trust, and the rare kind of honor that outlives even the West itself.